أهلا أهلا.
Sorry to interrupt, but quick question.
تفضل.
This edge brilliant.
Yeah.
You know that, mashallah, you did this thing.
استبيان, yeah.
This beyond. As you know, we don't have everybody's number, so we need to do an SQ.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
And can we put that bar on that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, because the thing is, ما يضر أصلاً. Because the thing is, like, the first question is, do you pray Fajr or Hijrah? And then if you say no, it doesn't. خلاص, the form is done. Yeah. Okay. All right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about conflict. So conflict is a little bit different than we had talked about before, arguing and dispute. Right, so arguing and dispute. Today we're going to talk about conflict. Conflict is a little bit more involved. It's like the next stage after arguing and dispute, inshallah, and we're going to spend a little bit of time focusing on that and talking about it. So Ghazāli, he opens the chapter by talking and mentioning to us that conflict is actually beyond dispute and beyond arguing, and he actually defines all three of them then. He says dispute is a disagreement with another, and we had talked about showing holes in the discourse, right? And we had said that there are different ways to do that. We can actually address the person's words, right? And we said, like, you know, correcting their grammar, that's one way of doing it, where we actually distract from the argument, and it's just a way to actually attack them and try to bring them down and bring down their person. We had talked about arguing, and we had said that this is the difference that he mentions between al-mira' wa jadal is arguing. It's a way to promote a particular school of thought. What does Ghazāli feel about, like, the madhahib and the tamadhub and, you know, these political ideologies or these polemic ideologies? How does he deal with them? Does he view them in a positive light? No, not at all. He views them in a very negative light, and the reason that he does that is he said this takes away from a person's sincerity, and the reason it takes away from an individual's sincerity is because now, can you just check if the mic is on? There's a little screen. You see that red wire? There's a little screen on it. It should be moving up. No. That little red wire, the small little spiral one. You see what it's connected to? It's on. Okay. So he talks about how this actually takes away from an individual's sincerity, because instead of calling to Allah, you end up calling to that particular group, or you end up calling to that particular ideology. And then he talks about conflict. So he says conflict is basically going back and forth in order to try to attain a right or take somebody's right. This can either be in the form of money, which is a theme that he continues on through this entire section, or it could be taking right in other means, but I think money was just the easiest example, which is why he's pretty consistent with it and why he focuses a lot on it. So he said, this is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, "Inna abghad al-rijal ila Allahi al-aladdul khasam," that the most hated person in the sight of Allah is the most quarrelsome person. That every time that you talk to this person, every time you interact with this person, every time you deal with this person, it just ends up being a fight. It ends up being a debate. It ends up being some type of argument. And this is why it causes so many problems. This is why this individual, he causes so many issues. And if we think about the quarrelsome person, what comes to mind, and why do you think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates this person so much? Yes.
I'm sorry, what quarrelsome?
Quarrelsome is somebody who fights a lot and argues a lot. Yes.
Probably their response.
Okay, so this person is very impulsive, right? They do not filter anything that they say. So what happens when a person is quarrelsome? There's no filter in what they say, and they can say things that are very what?
It can be wrong or something.
Right. So they could be wrong for sure. And what else? Huh? Right. Instigating in what sense? So here, if I'm saying something to you and I'm just like, you know, I mean, I'm just trying to instigate it. What will end up happening to the other person? All right, so here I'm pulling out emotions from that person, right? And that's not fair. If I'm just playing on people's emotions and I'm playing with how they're reacting and playing with how they're dealing, this is something that's extremely problematic. But if I myself am quarrelsome, it's very easy for me to say hurtful things. It's very easy for me to lie. It's very easy for me to be insulting. And do we want to be around the quarrelsome person? No. And I know, like, I'm not I'm not trying to connect it to the talk before after that I gave after Isha. But the reality is, if I want to gauge my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the best ways to gauge that is my relationship with people in general, right? Myself included. So if I look around and I see in my life that all of my relationships are problematic, where is the commonality in those relationships? Is me, right? I am the commonality in all those relationships. And if I am the commonality in the problematic relationships, then I need to look internally, right? I need to really do a lot of introspection and figure out where that what it is that I'm doing that's wrong, or what I'm doing is problematic that is leading to all of these broken relationships. And this is what happens with the quarrelsome person, because he will always find something to get somebody else upset, right? He's always in that mode where he's just looking to engage with others, or looking to fight with others, and looking to cause problem with others. What is a good modern translation of the quarrelsome person? The troll, right? Like, right? So what is his goal? What is the goal of a troll? Right, just to get you upset. He's basically just trying to pull out emotion from you, and he's trying to play on your emotion, and he actually feeds on that response, right? He feeds on that emotion, he feeds on that response. And how does the person who is being trolled feel? Just like drained, like emotionally drained, right? You know, you're putting yourself all into this, and you're so invested in this. So we'll definitely talk about strategies on how to deal with the troll. So here's some narrations that he always starts off the chapter with. And I share, again, these are just some of them, they're not all of them. He said, whoever argues without knowledge will seek Allah's anger until he leaves the argument. Here, woe to the arguer, for it is a means of destroying one's religion. Here, this is a nice story Ibn Qutayba mentions. He says that Bashir ibn Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr passed by him and saw him sitting. So he's basically, you have Qutayba passing by, you have Bashir sitting down, and he's like, why are you sitting down? What's going on? So he says to him, he's like, I got into an argument with my cousin. So he's like, okay, well, you know, I know your father. If you like, I have a good relationship with him. Let me go talk to him, and let's see if we can solve this. He says, but let me tell you something. I swear by Allah, the thing that will take away a person's religion, his muru'ah, his chivalry, his passion, and cause one's heart to be consumed by it is arguing. So I heard that. So I stood to leave, and I ran into my cousin. My cousin's there, and he's like, what's with you? You know, again, trying to engage, like trying to engage in the argument again. And he said, I'm not interested in engaging. He's like, I'm not looking to argue. I'm not looking to fight. So his cousin replies, he says, that's because you realized I'm right. Right, like, you know, like, and he's like, no, I just wanted to honor myself by putting myself above all of this. Right, this is how he answered. And he said, then, and this is his cousin now over here, he says, then I don't ask anything from you, it's all yours. Yeah, he's just like, why? Because he was being fed by the argument. He was being fed by the emotion. And he's like, now that he's like, okay, fine, you know, you can have the money. He's like, I don't even want the money here, just take it. This is a good story of how to deal with the troll. So what do you do? You don't engage. It's as simple as that. Because the thing that is feeding that troll is the engagement and the attention, right? And the emotion. These are all of the things that he's looking for. So if I don't give him those things, he's not getting the satisfaction, and he will not be able to engage you. So isn't arguing a means of getting my right? So don't I need to argue sometimes, like in order to get my right? What do you guys think? There are sometimes there are cases. Like if you have to go to court, right? That's a means of arguing. He says, but our discussion has to do with arguing with falsehood, right? And this is something that Ghazāli, he points out, and something that he mentions. He says falsehood is a few things. One of them is arguing without knowledge, similar to a lawyer who represents his client without bothering to know the details of the case. Any comment, Fazia? Our local JD.
I do my
So. But the thing is here, even if we talk about it from an Islamic perspective, if I am a lawyer, what is my job? No. So think about what you guys said. You said, all right, is it to defend my client? Well, to get money is number one, right? No, right? It's not to defend my client. It's to go to court to prove that there is not enough evidence to convict my client. Do you guys understand the difference? Because defending my client, what can become problematic? And because he could be guilty, right? It's very possible he could be guilty. But if I understand that my job as a lawyer is to go to court to prove to the court that there is not enough evidence to indict my client, it's a very different way of It's a very different perspective of dealing with it. Now, is it ethical? That's a different discussion altogether. But this essentially, this is what it is, and this is why the profession can be justified Islamically. So even in seeking my right, I need to be aware. There are a few things that we need to be aware of. Like even if I go and I'm engaging because I'm trying to get my right, I'm trying to seek my right here, I should stop at attaining my right and not intend destroying or hurting my opponent, right? So this is sometimes that what we do when we get into an argument with someone. Not only do we want to win the argument, but we want to what? Wait, we want to humiliate, you know what I mean? Like we want to take it that step further and we want to humiliate our opponent. And Ghazāli is saying, he's like, no, scale back, stop. Once you get your right, you're okay, you're fine. That's it. You achieve the mission that you were out there to do. And the moment that mission is achieved, we are immediately tempted. We're immediately tempted to take that next step now and to humiliate and to really put down and destroy the opponent or the person who it is that we're arguing with. So the problem is that even in arguing, that sometimes people will mix unnecessarily hateful words just to further prove their point. So, you know, saying things like, what are you, stupid? Do you not understand? Like, okay, that doesn't, you don't make any sense. Like, what is the purpose of making those statements? Does it help the argument that I'm trying to build? Right? It's just to hurt my opponent. That's the entire idea. So we say a lot of these things, we make a lot of these statements because the entire purpose is just to hurt the person that is in front of us. So he says that conflict, a lot of it can also be mixed in with this stubbornness that we have. Like all of us have this inherent stubbornness. Like, you know, there are certain things that we just don't want to secede to, and we just don't want to give into. And a lot of times, like, you know, we get to that situation and the goal, instead of getting our right, is now just to completely break our opponent and to completely destroy his argument. And even we'll find amongst ourselves, like, no, I needed to make a point. Right? You know, and sometimes we get there. Like, I needed to make a point. I needed to make him an example. Like, who appointed you? Right? Who appointed you to make this person an example? And even if I end up making this person an example, did I benefit that person? Who did I benefit? I only benefited my own ego. Like I just managed to stroke my own ego. That's it. That's all I managed to do. I didn't manage to benefit anyone. I didn't even benefit myself by going and destroying and putting down this person or destroying this person's argument. So sometimes, so he says that sometimes you'll argue over an amount of money just for the sake of the argument. You're not even interested in the money, because the amount of money that you can get out of it, for you, it's petty cash. It's like, you know, for some people, and that varies from person to person. For some people, $1,000 is petty cash. For some people, $10,000 is petty cash. For some people, you know, $5 might be a lot of money. But for each of those people, like, you know, for example, I think something that we can all agree on, like arguing over a quarter. You know what I mean? Like, is it worth it? No, it's not. Like, even if I took a quarter out of my pocket and I threw it away in the garbage, it would not, I wouldn't feel like I lost anything, because that's how valueless it is. But even in that situation, people are still willing to argue over that quarter, even though they don't actually want it. To the point that the only reason I argued was my stubbornness, and I needed to dishonor him, even if I got the money. And again, it's something that he could have thrown away. It was the argument that mattered. It was the argument that was important. And a lot of times it had nothing to do with the money. So what about someone who successfully avoids this type of argument? What would you guys say about this person? I'm sorry? I would say, okay, that person is patient. What else? Yes.
They don't speak much.
All right, this person probably doesn't speak a lot. And remember the introductory chapters, we had talked about the virtue of what? Of silence, right? The virtue of silence and not speaking a lot. So these are definitely important points. He says, even if he uses Shari'i appropriate arguments, right? He doesn't insult. He makes sure he stays to the point. He makes sure he doesn't get to a point now where he's starting to oppress this individual. He said, this is definitely not haram, for sure. There's no doubt about it. But it's also not ideal. Why? Because it's still
beneficial.
It's still arguing, though. It's still arguing. Remember, that's the point in conflict. It still causes conflict. They're still arguing here. So for Ghazāli, even this, he's saying it's not haram, but it's still problematic. There's still a problem here. There's still an issue here. Because what happens is that even if you win following the Shari'i guidelines, even if you win not abusing anyone, what happens is that the other opponent's ego, what happens? They end up feeling bruised and battered. And what happens is that even though I win, if I hear the other person gets hurt, what happens to me? Like, I still take pleasure in that. Have I managed to bring Islah? I haven't. I haven't managed to bring any type of reconciliation at all. I haven't managed to bring anyone together. And even though I followed all the guidelines I'm supposed, right? I did everything I was supposed to do. But even then, the outcome, did it benefit me? It might have, in a worldly sense. But spiritually, we still have someone. Yes, go ahead.
Does that work with mother and child?
It depends. So no, which is an interesting dynamic. So when we talk about like parents and their children, number one, it's very important to understand that there's a big cultural lens that we look at obedience of parents through. But and what do I mean by that? That there are a lot of parents who live in a culture now where any type of disagreement is considered disrespectful and disobedience. But I am allowed to disagree with my mother and father. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not allowed to disobey them. Now, how do I define that? And how do I determine what that line is? Where is the point of disagreement and where's the point of disobedience? Like, so for example, if my mother asked me to take out the trash and I didn't, I'd be like, no, it's better to take it out tomorrow because the trash goes on Friday. Is that disagreement or disobedience? I think it's disobedience. I find it personally to be disobedience. But see how subjective it got? I'm sorry?
That seems pretty straightforward.
No, I mean, for me, it does. Right? You know what I mean? Like, so, but take out the trash. Obviously, she has her reasons. She has her logic behind it. But if my mom says, okay, you have to get your hair cut like this, and I get my haircut a different way, is that disobedience or disagreement? This is more disagreement. My parents want me to become a lawyer, and I go and I study engineering. That's disagreement.
I
Yeah.
heard there are several conditions. What defines as obedience and not.
Yeah.
There are multiple, like first it should be halal.
Yeah.
Well,
Of course.
so you can, well, citizen drink alcohol.
Yeah.
Obviously cannot
Sure.
obey. That should be reasonable. That should be benefit bring immediate benefit. Bring immediate benefit and a couple other items.
So, I mean, the thing is, I think there is a good way to actually gauge a lot of these things. And there's definitely an algorithm to help determine if something is disagreement or disobedience. But basically, if it has to do with my personal self, right? If it has to do with my personal self, at that point, I am allowed agency to make choices, right? I don't have to agree. And what are some of those things? Whether they be long-term life decisions, whether it be dress, or whether there might be certain things that apply specifically to the house. Like, for example, if my parents only eat hand-slaughtered dhabiha and I don't, this is a disagreement or disobedience? This is a disagreement. So how do you reconcile this disagreement?
You bring them whatever they want.
Why? Because it's their house. Right, it's their house. I can't just walk home with Popeyes and expect them not to make a scene, right? That's not appropriate. But can my parents now dictate to me what I eat outside the house? No. I mean, they are welcome to, but at the end of the day, that would not be considered disobedience. That would be considered disagreement, right? Where there's room for disagreement, and again, anything that has an immediate, anything that has an immediate effect on me, this is where I'm allowed agency. But if there's something that has effects on my parents or something that has effect on the house, then that would be considered disobedience. If there's a certain timeline that my parents follow, if there's something that they want, then those things that affect them immediately. If my parents put a curfew, at 11 and I come home at 11:30. Why is that disobedience? I'm 18. I'm an adult. I should be able to stay out late. Because I'm leaving their house, right? It's their home. Now, if I have my own apartment and my parents are telling me to be home by 11:30, and I'm independent, right? Or now, let's say like I have 4 kids and my parents are like, don't stay out until 10:30. So at that point, is that disobedience? No, right? It's disagreement or telling, even telling your kid, because sometimes it passes down, what I mean? And or grandparents, they'll like impose on the grandkids, be like, well, since your father has to listen to me, you have to listen to me too, right? It's like we've inherited this dictatorship, right? But it's very important to keep some of those things in mind. And when we talk about issues of disagreement, that means that there's space for discussion, right? There's space for discussion versus disobedience where you don't really have space for discussion. there's a difference. There's also a difference between challenging and questioning. So parents, husband, whoever, whoever is in authority, they're allowed to always be what? Questioned, right? But they can't always be challenged. Does that help? Or did I make it worse? Yes. Between what?
Like for example, like, is there the level of emotional intelligence that it takes in order to like scope out a disagreement versus yeah.
There are like, but unfortunately, I don't have a hard fast rule that can help you determine that, because sometimes a lot of things are just individual judgment calls too. Emotional intelligence, I find a good translation for emotional intelligence to be sabr. That's what I feel sabr is. Sabr is having because if you look at any ayah, you look at any hadith, it's always talking about an emotional response to a particular situation. Owning particular emotions is fine, right? I can happy, sad, angry, and sometimes that emotion might not even be appropriate for that situation, right? I might be at a wedding and I'll be angry, or I might be at a janazah and I'll be happy, right? It's not necessary that my emotion matches the situation, but what am I required to do shar'an? I'm required to control what? The emotion or the response, right? The manifestation. It's the manifestation that I'm required to control. That manifestation is actually sabr. That's what emotional IQ is. So having that, you should always try to have that, right? There's never a case in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about the sabirin, right? It's a praised group of people because these individuals, more often than not, they compose themselves, right? But just because somebody is sabir, does it mean that there are moments where he's not? Yeah, there are, right? I mean, just like Shaitan, the Prophet ﷺ, he described him as kadhub, but there are situations where he said what? Sadaq al-kadhub, right? He said that the liar spoke the truth. So just because somebody is ascribed with a particular characteristic, it doesn't mean that we don't falter in that characteristic, sometimes. So we say that this person, he becomes so consumed in this argument, right? Because there are certain arguments or certain conversations that we can have with people that we just become so consumed by it that it takes up all of our living, breathing, like all of our thoughts. Because why? We're so emotionally invested in it. We become so emotionally invested in a lot of these arguments, a lot of these discussions, and it takes away from our taqwa, it takes away from our wara, it takes away from our khushu', our humility. Like it takes away from all of these things, which is why Ghazāli he's so stern on staying away from it and why it's so important to avoid it. So whether it be dispute, arguing, or conflict, whatever the case might be, he said all of these are these are actually the sources of all evil because they are the easiest and quickest way to actually manifest the ego. And why? Because I'm putting somebody else down. Or what is the other thing? We said you're putting someone else down, and what is the other manifestation of it? Bringing up myself, right? Like I start pumping myself up. I start talking about how amazing I am, how great I am, how accomplished I am. There are a few phrases I really dislike, like personally. When people come up to me and they say, "In my professional opinion," I hate that. Like I really, really hate that. Why is that? Because you are already grading your own opinion, right? You've managed to grade your own opinion even before sharing it. And if you were so professional, then you should be able to convince me, the non-professional, right? Isn't that your job? Your job as a professional is now to convince me, the non-professional, with your skill set. And even if people ask me questions, every time I ask a question, be like, well, in my scholarly opinion, right? It's just so arrogant. It's so arrogant because I'm already grading and qualifying my positions before even sharing them. Now, isn't it upon the person in front of me who's actually receiving this? If I'm so professional, if I'm so scholarly, if I'm so understanding, if I have so much knowledge, shouldn't I be able to digest and present that in the easiest way so the person in front of me actually understands it? And isn't it better for me to bring them to my level instead of me just pumping up my own? Yeah, Allah protect us. So he's saying that this door should never be opened. He said when it comes to arguing, when it comes to dispute, it comes to conflict, this door should never be opened except out of necessity. That's it. And remember, we had talked about this before. Why does Ghazāli, when he talks about curiosity, when he talks about dispute, when he talks about silence, when he talks about lying, he pushes the bar so hard. He pushes so much. Why does he do that? Right? Because again, it's to reset our gauge. are there situations where there's arguings? Okay, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there are some conversations and some discussions that I personally find healthy. One of the best ways that I learned was through munaqsha, was through debating. So does it have its virtues? Yeah, absolutely. But those are in very selective environments. Those are with very selective people. Because me going back and forth, the point is not when I'm debating someone, what should the purpose be? To find the truth. Ahsan. Right? When I'm debating with someone, the purpose is to find the truth. It's not for me to prove my point. Could it be right? Yeah, maybe. But I have to be able to, and the problem with that is that requires a lot of humility. It requires a lot of humility now for me to present my idea, to bring it forward and be like, okay, hey, it's open for discussion. Let's talk about it. Okay, this is what I believe. I might be wrong. And that's really hard, right? Like when I'm putting because I'm making myself vulnerable. And that vulnerability, it requires a lot of humility. It requires a lot of humility, just being able to support or understand that, okay, there's a possibility, I'm going to put myself out there and there's a possibility I'll be wrong. But that's what humility is. May Allah make us humble. I mean, so there's some guidelines that he mentions. So he says, so an individual who manages to avoid being insulting, an individual who stops at his right, he doesn't go beyond that. This individual, he's managed to avoid sinning. So even the wording that he uses here, is this like a praiseworthy thing? Right? It doesn't sound like he's like, yeah, you did it, or like you made it. He's like, yeah, you managed to avoid sinning. Right? You know what I mean? It's not like, okay, yeah, you did good. Because what would the opposite of this be? He says you managed to get rewarded. Think about that. So he's saying the best you did was you managed to avoid sinning, but you didn't succeed in gaining any reward. So he said the most he'll lose by arguing dispute. He says he'll lose the associated reward. Why? Because the opposite of dispute is good speech. So he's saying that when basically it's a very binary presentation that he's bringing now. So he says, okay, you have good speech and you have conflict or you have dispute, which is bad speech. So he said you can either have good speech or you can have bad speech. If you avoid bad speech, all you did was avoid haram. But if you have good speech, you manage to what? Get rewarded. And he says, look at here. He says the lowest form of good speech is what? Like agreement, like just superficially agreeing.
Agree to disagree.
Right. So when you say that, when you say I agree to disagree, even that statement in itself, it's a charged statement, right? It's a charged statement in itself. It's like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but you're still an idiot, right? What I mean? Like, so like, agree to disagree, even superficially agreeing. Like the thing is, at the end of the day, even if I submit my argument, what's going to happen? Did he change my belief? No. Yeah.
What about family counselors that say they get to make it?
I think that's healthy. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, al-ilm bi ta'allum, wal-hilm bi tahallum. He says knowledge is in seeking it and forbearance is in practicing it. A person doesn't start off generous. You actually have to what?
Practice.
You have to practice it. And the first time I give money, like, am I converted now? Like, it's like, oh man, like, whew, that was easy, right? You have to show it consistently. And how do you show it? You have to keep practicing. You have to keep trying. So I think like fake it till you make it attitude. I think it's good. I think it's healthy. I think it should be practiced. Yes.
You repeat that now.
Oh, okay. It's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He says, knowledge is with seeking it and forbearance is with practicing it. And he says here, the harshest possible speech is cursing and disagreement. And why is that? Because you are hurting another person. And this is really important. Remember, the discussion of taqwa, Ghazāli revolves it around what? Taqwa, he links it directly to what? To khuluq, to how you deal with others. Right? These are directly linked concepts. And one of the worst elements of taqwa, or if a person, how can you gauge a person doesn't have taqwa? I mean, we're not here to like, it's like, oh, you're level 7. No, it's not that. It's how I gauge my own taqwa is how insulting I am with others and how I deal with others. And how, if I'm looking down on others, then I really need to check my sincerity, and I really need to understand my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's definitely not healthy. So what is the source of harsh speech? He says that there are two ways that harsh speech manifests itself, either through ignorance or through lies. That's it. He said this is the only two ways to get it. And he said the problem with both ignorance and lies is that they both cancel out good speech. The more an individual engages in happy with his ignorance, and the happier he is with the lies, the more he'll avoid partaking and delving into good speech. He closes out the chapter with a few verses. He says, وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا, and speak good words to all people. He brings another ayah, وَإِذَا حُيِّيتُم بِتَحِيَّةٍ فَحَيُّوا بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا أَوْ رُدُّوهَا. That when you believers are offered a greeting, respond with a better one, or at least return it. Allah keeps account of everything. Ibn Abbas, he does tafsir of this verse, saying that this applies even to the non-believers. That if they greet you, then greet them in a better way. Again, that focus on khuluq, that focus on dealings, the focus of the relationships that we all have in our lives. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-kalima tayyiba sadaqa, that a good word is charity. Again, those good words are the things that bring good deeds. Avoiding harsh speech, avoiding disputes, avoiding conflict. You are just successfully avoiding sinning. You're not actually putting anything in your mizan hasanat. There's some narrations he closes with. Umar said, obedience is an easy thing. He said, a smile and relaxed speech. Some wise men said, soft speech washes away all evil odors from the limbs. And the last one, all of this concerns the virtue of good speech, the opposite of arguing, dispute, and conflict, all of which is hated and only harms the hearts and livelihood, and feeds our anger, tortures our souls. We ask Allah for success through His infinite blessing and generosity. Ameen. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Do we have any questions before we end? Next time, inshallah, we'll be talking about flowery speech. Yeah, interesting. It's like unnecessary praise, flowery speech.
Next Thursday?
Huh? Next. Oh, next Wednesday. You guys want to have class or no? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Cut off. Is it? Huh? On Wednesday? I mean, we can go out to eat after. Huh? We celebrate on our own way. Yeah, it's fun. A good word is charity. A good word is charity. Yes.
So I was a little behind on reading the books, but I was able to read the earlier book on eating.
Yeah.
And I noticed like a big theme that they kept talking about, like
Starvation.
the importance of like bread.
Yeah.
And like how that was like a staple.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, like from your perspective, like how do we make that realistic in our lives today?
Sure.
Like, just because like that is like a very
it was kind of abstract for you, and it was kind of like distant. I get it. So go back to the lectures. I actually go into a lot more detail concerning that, but just very quickly, it's important to introduce an element of plainness into our lives, right? And this is actually like simplicity, plainness, delayed gratitude. All of these concepts are extremely important that we need to teach ourselves and need to teach our children. So how do we do that? Just once a week, for example, the meal is bread, or the meal is white rice. Why? Because it's enough to nourish, right? And it's enough to satiate. It'll take care of our immediate needs. And not just that, now it'll help us appreciate the food that we're getting the rest of the week. You know, a lot of the problems that we have, you know, I won't even say just this generation, but just in general, is how spoiled we are, right? So why are we spoiled? Is because we're getting everything we want for when we want it. So how do we do that? We have to learn to scale back. It's like, okay, well, I want a cookie. Okay, no problem. You can have a cookie, but you need to do X, Y, Z. And when I do X, Y, Z, what am I doing? I'm delaying that gratification, and I'm rewarding myself after actually putting myself through some adversity and hardship. Because it is adversity and hardship that actually build our character physically and spiritually. That is what's fundamental, and that's what's important. In understanding how to appreciate what we have, it's really a matter of just bringing our scale down, right? And really getting a look at things for how they are. And another example of that is like, just go to a hospice. You know, it's really depressing. You know, it's really depressing going in there. But the thing is, like, these people are on the brink of death. It really helps appreciate life and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Just go to a VA. So for all of you that support like government healthcare, like go to, go to a VA and just take a look. And that is government healthcare at work. You're talking about people with missing limbs, people with mental health issues, people with all kinds of problems, and they're just living in this group home with minimum oversight. And praise Allah that He hasn't put any of us in that situation. So perspective is really important, and that's the whole thing that Ghazāli is pushing. Even like his whole talk on like, okay, starvation, and like, it's important to like, have eaten for like 30 years. I mean, like you have a lot of that, but again, what is the idea behind that? The idea is to, again, reset that gauge. So you have all of these extreme examples, and the idea behind those extreme examples is because our gauge is so skewed. Like we're so spoiled that we don't even understand what actual hunger looks like. We don't understand what actual starvation looks like. We don't understand what malnutrition actually is. Like, these are things that they're so beyond our scope and ability that it's very difficult for us to even gauge that. And which is why you find like, he'll say some extreme things. Sometimes I'll be like, wow. And then I'll, and then just a matter of putting that perspective and be like, okay, I see what he's trying to do. Does that help?
Yeah. I mean, just
It was difficult to grasp. Yeah.
Because like,
Yeah.
like, don't dip it in anything. Like,
Yeah. And, why even avoid condiments, right? This is something that he had talked, because the idea is like, okay, you're not taking any type of pleasure here. You need to get to a point with food where you see food as a vehicle. It's just fuel. And it's just there to satiate you on your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to the point that, okay, where you can start eating, extravagant food again, but to you, eating that extravagant food or eating the bread, it's all the same. It doesn't mean that you won't enjoy it, but like it's just all the same in the sense that, okay, this is just a tool and this is just a means. It's not the goal, right? I'm not here to fill myself on this, or like, I want to buy a nice boat, or I want to get like a nice car, or nice house. Like, okay, those are all means. They're all means. The end goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
What if it's like your natural disposition, like your fitra, to love baking or cooking?
Sure. So we all love, like, there are different things that we all love, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instilled in man a love for what? For wealth, right? Wealth is something that we all, so what do? It's just a matter of curbing it, right? It's a matter of curbing it. It's a matter of channeling it in the right way. So if somebody enjoys cooking, like, okay, go cook for a soup kitchen. You know what I mean? Like, you look at those social outlets that are available in order to contribute and actually channel those things in a positive way. Because the thing is like, okay, like, if you're cooking like a really extravagant meal, all right, is it the process of cooking that you're enjoying? Is it the food that's coming out of it? Like, just imagine you cook like, the creativity that's there. It's like, okay, well, I have this meal and blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, okay, have someone come and eat it in front of you. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, and if your heart is, if it's feeling jarred, then that might be what you need to do to really break that, to break that desire. Because the idea is what? To break desires, and that they are subservient to you, not that you are subservient to them. Because all of these desires we had talked about, there's anger, there's appetence, right? There are all of these different desires that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And does Ghazāli does he talk about them in a bad way? No, he talks about them in a very neutral way. He says that these are good when you channel them for good, and they're bad when you channel them for bad. But you can actually use these as a means of protection. You can use these as a means of proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can use these as a means of becoming a better person. Any other questions? No. All right. Jazakumullah khair. I'll see all of you next week then. Sallallahu ala khairi khalqi nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah.